the $18.5 billion of extra health investments that we've made to support our hospitals, to support respiratory clinics and testing reagents and the PPE requirements, right, all of this. What it actually has meant to Australians over these many months is that this government has had your back in the course of the worst pandemic we've seen in a century. And with that assurance, they've been able to get through each day. It's been tough, no doubt. And mental health and anxiety and pressures on families, economic and otherwise, have been extraordinary. But knowing that each day the government would be there and provide the support that was necessary and has not held back, I think has provided, in the feedback that I've received from Australians all around the country, a peace of mind that has been very important during the course of this crisis. And of course, the challenges continue. This is the third successive day now we've had no community transmission in Australia. That's very welcome, but it can't be taken for granted. And the challenges of the pandemic and the COVID-19 recession don't just end. They remain challenges for some time yet to come. And the approach that we've taken up until now is the approach we will continue to take. We will be responsive. We will be targeted. We will be proportionate. We will calibrate the supports that are needed when and where they're needed. The first part of that plan has been to cushion the blow. And the blow has been great, but the support that has been provided has cushioned that blow for individuals, for businesses, right throughout Australia. But we cannot allow the lifeline that has been extended to also now hold Australia back as we move into the next phases of recovery. We've always been clear that we would move through various phases, and we've announced changes to other elements of the supports that have been put in place by the government. Those cushioning the blow supports were not only important to those individuals, but they bought Australia time. They bought the states and territories time. As states have had to close down their economies, it has been the federal government that has underwritten those measures. They would not have been possible were it not for the underwriting of the federal government, and I know premiers and chief ministers understand that. We took those decisions together. They understood that we were stepping up in the same time as them stepping up to doing the things that they needed to do. But as we go forward, we are seeing confidence return, whether it's on the NAB measures that were just released today, the ANZ measures showing confidence getting above where it was pre-pandemic, or indeed the Westpac figures that were released for last month. Confidence is returning. Australia is safely reopening, and it needs to remain safely open. Jobs are returning. Job advertisements have doubled since May on the most recent figures in October. And we know that employers are looking for people to come back to work. And we need to ensure that we have the right settings in place to support that. Today we are announcing the changes to Job Seeker Supplement, the COVID supplement that we introduced at the start of the pandemic, and we will be extending that supplement for the 3 months after the end of December. We'll be changing the rate of that supplement down to $150 for that period out to the end of 3 months, and this will come at a cost to taxpayers of some $3.2 billion over that 3-month period. Not a small measure, a very important measure to ensure that that support remains. I was very clear that when we made the changes to JobKeeper, we would make a later decision on JobSeeker, taking into account what was happening in the labour market, and we would go through that process. That will need to be legislated before the end of the year. So Cabinet has considered it. It has now gone through our party room this morning, and the legislation will come into place later this week. And I will ask Minister Ruston to take you through the other details, because many other aspects of the COVID supplement and the eligibility arrangements will also be maintained over that 3-month period. But, you know, we can't stay stuck and neutral in this country. We've got to keep moving forward. Like the emblems on our national crest, the kangaroo and the emu, they only go forward, and that can be the only plan for Australia. That's what we tell the kids when they come here to Parliament House, that's what Australia's all about. And our COVID recovery plan is exactly the same. It's about continually going forward, not taking steps back. And today's announcement to gear through the changes in the JobSeeker payment, as we are doing at the same time with JobKeeper, we'll see more and more Australians, we'll see more and more businesses graduate from the economic supports that were so essential over these many months. I'll ask Anne to go through the further details and we can take questions on that, and I have no doubt other matters you'd like to raise.
Well, look, thank you very much, Prime Minister. And today we're here to announce the extension of temporary measures as we see our economy gaining confidence and momentum to start to build. So we're making announcements today not only about the increase in the extension of the temporary coronavirus supplement payment, but also a number of other measures that will be extended from the 1st of January through to the 31st of March. These measures also allow more Australians to be able to get access to payment as we stand side by side with Australians who've been hardest hit by the COVID pandemic. But we will continue to monitor the economic conditions to make sure that we strike the right balance between providing elevated levels of support for people who need it, but at the same time creating the incentives for people to re-engage with the workforce. The particular measures that are contained in the extension from the 1st of January to the 31st of March 2021, as the Prime Minister said, the extension of the coronavirus supplement at a rate of $150 per fortnight. In addition, we'll be extending the income-free area, which is currently at $300 per fortnight, because we want to encourage Australians to dip their toe back into the jobs market and test their ability to get work, because we know that people who report earnings are twice as likely to actually come off payment in the short term than those that don't report any earnings at all. We will be maintaining the elevated level of the partner taper rate, which means that people whose partners are earning up to $80,000 per year will also still be able to gain access to payment. In addition, the expanded eligibility criteria will cover people who are sole traders, people who are self-employed, those that have been stood down but remain connected to their workplace, people who are in isolation and people who have to care for somebody in isolation. We will also be extending some of the waiting periods to make sure that people have got quick and easy access to payment. So as we go forward and as the jobs market starts to open up and as our economy starts to recover from this extraordinary pandemic, we want to encourage all Australians to re-engage with the workforce. Over recent months, we have put in place social security measures to support all Australians through this pandemic, but now our focus has to be on supporting Australians back to work.
Thank you, Anne. Questions on the announcement today?
Is the plan now to have a decision on the base rate of JobSeeker at the end of March to coincide with the end of this extension?
Well, we haven't made a final decision on that, Mark. What we're focused on right now are the emergency measures that need to be in place for the pandemic. There are issues that relate to the question you've raised. They're certainly there. But right now, what matters is the supports that will continue to be provided at these elevated and temporary levels. That's where we've applied our focus. What we've learnt throughout the course of the COVID-19 pandemic and recession is things can change quickly, and we need to be very responsive to the conditions on the ground economically and otherwise. We are getting a lot of feedback from around the country, and particularly in regional areas, about employers who are just trying to get people to fill jobs. And we know there are many people out there for those jobs, and we need to connect them into those jobs. The mutual obligation arrangements have been reintroduced, and they will soon again be reintroduced in Victoria as well, and an announcement we made about that at the appropriate time. But I've got to tell you, those mutual obligation arrangements are also being enforced. There have been close to 260,000 suspensions, and from the 4th of August to the 31st of October, there have been 242 payment cancellations. So the mutual obligation requirements are there, and we're serious about them. But we're also serious about the support we need to provide to Australians. So we will consider those other matters at a later time. But right now, we're focused on the delivery of the supports that are needed here in the middle of the recession.
If no decision has been made, does that mean that you could continue the $150 fortnightly supplement indefinitely? And is there recognition that JobSeeker can't return back to the rate of $40 a day?
Well, my answer is the same as I just gave to Mark. What we're announcing today was what we're doing for 3 months at a cost of over $3 billion to taxpayers to extend a higher and elevated level of support for JobSeeker out till the end of March. That's what we announced today. I haven't speculated on any other questions.
Temporary, though.
Behaviour of Alan Tudge and Christian Porter.
Those other matters, let's stay focused on JobSeeker and the support we're providing to Australians during the pandemic.
temporary, but it could be extended beyond March. So which is it?
It's what we're doing is what I've announced today. If we're to make other announcement at another time about other issues, we'll do it then. Any other questions on JobSeeker? The recession, the pandemic. Yep, John.
You're saying we're going to sort of move forward here. Just seen a new president elected. There's good news on the vaccine today.
Yeah, there is good news.
Do you feel like we're at some sort of turning point in the last few days?
Well, I think we're in another... We've been on a turning point and moving forward again now, I think, for some time. It's still tough for so many Australians. I remember I was asked in this courtyard a while back when we were talking about national accounts figures and where the economy was. Well, we'll know about that later in this year in December, prior to the mid-year statement, when the national accounts tell us what happened in the September quarter. But that's what the numbers will say. The lived experience on the ground, I know, is still very difficult for many Australians, and that's why we've been very clear about extending the support through JobKeeper and JobSeeker. That's why the JobMaker hiring credit is in the budget. That's why the instant expensing arrangements are there in the budget, and the loss carrybacks for COVID losses to support the recovery of the Australian economy. That's why HomeBuilder is in place. That's why Job Trainer, which delivers 340,000 additional training places, is there. That's why there's 30,000 additional university placements for next year. That's what Australia needs. That's what the government is providing. And so, yes, I do believe we're well on the road to recovery. The comeback for Australia has certainly begun, and we want to see that accelerate. We're seeing Australia reopen. It was great to be down in Tasmania as it reopened to people from New South Wales on Friday and Saturday. And I think we'll see that continue. National Cabinet is meeting later this week, and we'll get a further update on our goal of getting there by Christmas, and I think we're making very good progress on that. You mentioned the vaccine. I don't want to overstate it, but that is welcome news. It is one of 4 vaccines that Australia is involved in, and these results are very promising, and I'm optimistic and hopeful about next year, about the rollout of those vaccine programs. As the Health Minister said yesterday in the House, manufacturing has begun of the AstraZeneca vaccine, and that's subject, of course, to TGA approval and all the necessary health checks and approvals. The vaccines that will be made available to Australians will be done so first and foremost on the basis that they are safe for Australians to take, and that's our commitment to Australians, and that's our very robust process. Yeah.
I'm really concerned about, reports from charities, social organisations, ACOS, for instance, worried about a rise in issues like poverty, like homelessness, like people not being able to afford food based on a lowering of this JobSeeker rate of the coronavirus supplement.
Well, this is why we're extending it. This is why we're extending JobSeeker. This is why we're extending JobKeeper. This is why we're getting people into jobs. This is why we've got a JobMaker hiring credit. This is why we're doing all the things we can to get Australians into jobs as we see the number of job advertisements and places become available again. We can't stay stuck in neutral. We do need to move forward. And there is other forms of cash and emergency assistance, and Anne, you might want to comment on those, that is available to people through the normal channels. I mean, Australia has a strong social safety net. What we did at the start of the crisis was to strengthen that even further for how strong the blow was that we would have to withstand. But as the economy starts to move back and the confidence lifts and jobs come back, we can't allow our safety net to hold people back. We can't have that. That's not good for them. We want them to be able to bounce back and be able to get back into the jobs that are increasingly becoming available. But Anne, did you want to talk about emergency cash assistance?
Yes, we'll certainly. Through the COVID pandemic, we've put a number of measures in place, including the support package that we have provided, a $200 million package that is over and above the support that we give to emergency relief providers and our food relief providers to support Australians who found themselves through difficult times through this pandemic. But we have to remember this is in addition to elevated levels of support that were already in place for these measures, including significant increase in the amount of funding that was provided to victims of domestic violence during this pandemic, in addition to the unprecedented $340 million that is, sits behind the Fourth Action Plan. An additional $150 million has been provided to domestic violence frontline services to support particularly women and children who found themselves victims of domestic violence during this pandemic. So there are a number of measures that are in place in addition to those that are already in place to support Australians.
Chris, we've seen a surge of the virus across the Northern Hemisphere. What's your view on when the international borders might open again, and what plans are you putting in place to try and do that?
It's a topic that we'll discuss again on Friday. Not to the point of a decision on that, but I think to further assess where things are at. We continue to hold these discussions with countries like Japan, and we've had them before with Korea. The specific nations, of course, New Zealand has already been open for travel into Australia without quarantine arrangements, and I welcome the fact that in Hobart those flights will be able to go there directly. So I think we proceed cautiously. There are countries that are doing obviously far better than what we're seeing, of course, in Europe and the United States. The situation in Europe and the United States is awful, and obviously that presents great risks for people coming from those parts of the world to Australia, but out of many parts of Asia, particularly in North Asia, places like Taiwan, and I'd also say parts and provinces of China, Singapore. We are looking at what alternative arrangements could be had to channel visitors through appropriate quarantine arrangements for low-risk countries. That is a process that other countries are doing as well. We're open to that, but we have not come to a point of decision on that. I mean, we are now 3 days without any community transmission. That is welcome. So the risk going forward for us with the pandemic is twofold. That we take the success for granted and fall back into old habits, and I'd say particularly in those states that are reopening now, and I hope will reopen more in the future, like Queensland, is to ensure the COVID-safe plans are in place for businesses, and particularly hospitality businesses. I haven't finished yet. And that they ensure that they are practicing them, and the QR code registration in premises, that all of this is done very, very tightly, and that the social distancing practices and the COVID-safe behaviours are enshrined, and the necessity to wear masks on public transport. All of that, if we lose our commitment to that, then we pull ourselves at risk. The other risk, of course, is people coming back from overseas. And we have Australians who are still coming back from overseas that we're looking to facilitate through both direct flights and lifting the caps to enable them to come back. The quarantine arrangements and then the outbreak management beyond that is how we continue to manage this risk. But I'm looking forward to a different environment next year, Chris, and we assess this at every meeting about what's possible.
Will you launch an investigation into the alleged behaviour of Christian Porter and Alan Tudge? And how do you respond to allegations of a culture of misogyny here in Parliament House?
Well, I think the issues that have been aired in relation to this matter are very important. And when the former Prime Minister made the announcement that there was a need to change the ministerial standards to address this, he had no greater supporter in that than me. And I'm pleased he did. And I believe that was a very important step in changing a culture. And that culture, you will all know, is not restricted to government or opposition, to Labor or Liberal, or frankly the media in this building. It is important that everyone should feel safe in their workplace, that everyone should have proper channels through which they can deal with any issue about which they're uncomfortable. I think that's incredibly important. I think the change in ministerial standards introduced by my predecessor were important. I note that at the time that they were mocked, including by many media commentators. I note that they were mocked by the Labor Party. I note that the Labor Party has still not embraced them. They have still not adopted them. I think they're very important. And I ensured, after becoming Prime Minister, that they were maintained and upheld, and they will continue to be. And I think that's a good thing. I would hope they would be a permanent feature, not just of the workplace that happens just in my office or any other minister's office, but in your office, in legal firms, in accounting firms, in hospitals, in schools, in whatever your business is. That should be a normal standard. I think there are many businesses that have moved in that direction for a long time, and that's great. And I'm pleased that under my predecessor, those standards were applied to his cabinet and they apply to mine. And I would hope that they would be applied in many other places to provide that safety, whether it's in this building or anywhere else. But I too take this issue extremely seriously. In terms of the individuals who were the subject of the report last night, those matters were addressed by my predecessor at the time, and they relate to issues that predated that ministerial standard, and as a result, he dealt with them at that time.
Does that mean you don't need to do anything further in relation to what was aired by Four Corners last night?
They relate to circumstances that occurred that were known to the Prime Minister at the time, and they were appointed to the cabinet and the ministry, and those matters were dealt with then. And
does it raise any questions for you about Alan Tudge and Christian Porter and their fitness to hold office as ministers?
What it raises to me is that there is considerable cost and hurt, and we all are accountable for our own behaviour. And we apply standards to ourselves, and should. I'm not one that seeks to judge others on these things, and I know that many, particularly in the media, don't think it's their job to judge others either on these things. What is important is that there are standards, and the standards are adhered to. And under my administration, under my government, I take that code very seriously, and my ministers are in no doubt about what my expectations are of them. Absolutely no doubt about my expectations, and I expect them to be lived up to. But, you know, when you get past all the other issues around this issue, all I know is there are a number of families that have been broken, and there are some people who are really hurting over this. And I know that the people who are involved in these issues are working really hard to try and restore what has been terribly lost. And there is no greater thing that breaks my heart than the breakdown of a family. It breaks my heart. And frankly, that's the thing that moves me most. And we all got a job to do to ensure that we do everything we can to keep families together, and we all have personal responsibilities in that regard.
Is the attorney the right person? Is the Attorney General now the right person to be prosecuting your integrity agenda vis-a-vis the Corruption Commission and that sort of thing, given this controversy?
Well, these are matters that were dealt with by the former Prime Minister years ago, and so no, I don't hold any issues regarding that matter. I mean, I welcome the great work that he's done in pulling this proposal together and working with colleagues. I think that would be quite a leap.
Prime Minister, there's clearly a group of women who don't feel like this matter has been dealt with, which is why we saw the allegations we did last night. Will you launch any sort of investigation moving forward, given that these are now ministers sitting in your cabinet? And have you spoken with either of these ministers this morning about the allegations or last night?
No, I've spoken to both ministers. I've speak to them quite regularly, as you'd expect, including about these matters. And in terms of what their conduct is as one of my ministers, since they have served in my cabinet, there are no matters before me regarding their conduct while they've served in my cabinet. And indeed, I'm not aware of any conduct, nor was the previous Prime Minister, after the introduction of those standards. See, our government responded by putting in place standards that don't exist in many of your newsrooms. They don't exist. Those sort of standards between employers and employees don't exist in many workplaces around this country. I'll tell you what, they exist in mine. I've imposed them. They're there, and they'll be adhered to.
Ms Ruston, can I ask you, as a woman in the government, your reflections on the culture inside? Has it got better, worse, or no change since the bonk ban era?
Well, Phil, the only thing that I can...
How this ban is referred to, I think, is quite dismissive of the seriousness of the issue, Phil. And I would ask media to stop referring to it in that way. We took it very seriously. And I think constantly referring to it in that way dismisses the seriousness of this issue. It's a very serious issue. Thanks, Anne.
team.
Yeah.
What are your impressions on the culture?
Well, Phil, I mean, obviously I can only reflect on my own experience since I've been in this place since 2012, and I have to say that I have always felt wholly supported while I've been here. And I'd particularly note that, since becoming a member of the Cabinet and a member of the ERC, there is nobody who's provided me more support and shown greater respect towards me as an individual than the Prime Minister.
The Code of Conduct only refers to the behaviour of ministers with their own staff. Do you think there's any case for expanding that to the behaviour of ministers with staff generally in the building?
What it goes to, and when it was introduced by the former Prime Minister, and I had a hand in it as well as we discussed it, is dealing what happens in your workplace. And in all of these offices here, in my office and ministers' offices, there is that direct employer-employee relationship that is seeking to address. It's not what I'd call some sort of moral policeman or code more broadly. What it is about is dealing with genuine workplace issues in a workplace. And in a minister's office, that's the workplace. And this is incredibly important. And I think it has had a big impact on the understanding of the culture that is expected in ministerial offices. And since its introduction, I think it's been a very positive thing. And I would hope that those who didn't support it at the time would now support it. And I think increasingly that's the case. I thought it was a very wise act by the former Prime Minister, a very wise act, and I appreciated it very much. Yeah.
The ABC's managing director yesterday told a Senate hearing that he had been copied in on emails from federal government staff members relating to whether this was in the public interest or not. Why did your government raise concern with the ABC about this story?
Well, I'm not familiar with the emails you're referring to, but all I can say is, as I said yesterday, I mean, the ABC has to uphold its charter, and I think that's reasonable. I think that's totally reasonable. I mean, the matters that were aired last night, it's for others to form a perception about whether that was done in a way that focused on one side of politics rather than another. I won't offer a commentary other than to say it only focused on one side of politics, and if anyone who's had any experience around this place thinks that issues in the past are limited to one side of politics, well, honestly, you reckon? You really reckon? And so I think it's an important issue for all of the parliament. And it doesn't matter if you work in a shadow minister's office or a minister's office. I think the same standard should apply. I know it applies in my minister's offices, and I think it should apply in the opposition as well.
You talked about the ABC Charter, and you referred to it yesterday as well. Because you have twice referred to it, what is your belief? Do you believe that that story reflected the responsibilities of the ABC under its charter, and what are you going to do about it?
What I found interesting, and I suspect many viewers did also, was the dismissal of the idea that there should have been no investigation into anyone other than government members, government ministers. I mean, people in this place will know that there have been a lot of allegations over the time, and I really don't want to go into those, to be honest, because that's not what I'm seeking to do. I think there's a standard that we've set that should be upheld. I'm not one that's suggesting that there should be some sort of pouring over the coals of every person in this place going back over many, many years. I suspect if they did, there'd be a lot to write about and there'd be a lot to report. But the suggestion that is implied that there are no matters on this nature that are potentially subject to investigation by an independent report outside of the Liberal Party is absurd.
Taking any disciplinary action against Christian Porter and Alan Tudge?
Well, what are you suggesting?
Are you going to take any disciplinary action against them?
Well, as Prime Minister, they have engaged in no conduct as they've served in my cabinet that is in breach of the code. I would expect them, in their behaviour, as all of my ministers and myself included, to abide by the code and to live by that code as ministers. That's what I expect of them. If there's breaches of that code, well, that's how you deal with it. I've considered breaches of the code in the past. Not on this matter, I should stress, on other matters which you're familiar with.
Though, I mean, do you think it passes the pub test? Do you think Australians are looking at Christian Porter and Alan Tudge and think that they should be in the ministry right now?
Well, I think Australians understand more about human frailty then perhaps you're giving them credit. You know, family breakdown and individual decisions of people, and there's also no suggestion here of anything unconsensual, I should stress. These things happen in Australia. They happen in people's lives, and people greatly regret them. And they do tremendous damage to people's families and the lives of many others. And I know there'd be deep regrets about that. And I think Australians understand human frailty. And I think they understand that people who work in this place are just as human as anyone else and are subject to the same vulnerabilities and frailties as anyone. And I think some sensitivity to that. Perhaps I have a better opinion of Australians. I think they're far more understanding when it comes to human frailty and their understandings of what happens in their own lives and their own communities. Of course they want standards. That's why the standards are there. That's why the standards were introduced. The action was taken under the former Prime Minister, one that I strongly supported and one that I uphold to this day and will continue to